It's your Big Good Breakfast Show, Expresso in SABC3, and I can tell you it's time to get cultural because this is something wonderful. Jackï Job's dazzling career in performance arts and education started in the late 1980 with jazz art, which is something phenomenal, and has included extensive travels across Europe before settling in Japan in 2003. Now, while her work traces a variety of contemporary dance vocabularies, she is most known for her Japanese Butoh, I hope I'm saying that correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Butoh inspired work, which she has executed to perfection in her performance film, and that is called And Then. She's joining us right here on Expresso this morning to share a bit more about the fantastic work and her fascinating career. Welcome, Jackï.
Thank you.
Did I get it right?
You did. Butoh is
Butoh.
correct.
Butoh.
Yes, thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, and it's so good to have you in the studio. I had a good chat with you earlier as well, and just hearing all about this Japanese inspiration. But speaking of which, Butoh itself, such an interesting form of dance. You studied it as well, and you've had an opportunity to be completely surrounded by it. But what exactly is it? And take me through it. What does it mean?
Okay. Well, firstly, I should say I'm not a Butoh dancer.
Okay.
And for me, that's very important to say because my work philosophy is all about not being described in singular terms. That's been the philosophy.
Not being put in a box.
Don't put me in a box.
Okay.
And that is really in response to our politics in the country, the politics in the world, the divisive politics in the world. And that's how I've been working since 1994, which is when I started my independent career, working very, very clearly in this particular way. And Butoh, I discovered after many years. I worked in South Africa and abroad as a contemporary dancer at the Big Umbrella for the kind of dance form I do, working with ideas of identity, life cycles and identity that can't be boxed. And over the years, then moved, the way my career moved, ended up in Japan doing Butoh, and that's the essence of the work too, is how can you talk about yourself in non-Western terms? And non-Western terms in dance would be upright body, long legs, show off, show what you can do. Don't just be, which is more a Japanese kind of sense. Japanese don't like to show. They're not flashy, but all the detail is in absolutely everything they do. You know, when people talk about, I think one way, simple way for one to understand Butoh is people speak about a Zen philosophy and they say it's minimalist. So the less you put in, the nicer, the more Japanese it is. But the less you put in, the more detail has to be in what you put in.
Of course.
And that's actually what Zen is about, and that's what the Japanese community state of mind is about, and the Butoh draws from that. So it's minimalist, but thick and dense, with lots and lots and lots of detail. And the principles that I use in my dance are things like inversion of the body, being off-center, so not focusing on the center, not focusing on the sense of human. Don't center yourself. Don't center the world through the human lens, but look at it through the lens of an insect. Look at it through the lens of water. So understanding that we are not just who we think we are as human, but that we're made up of multiple elements within and around us. Restraint is a really important thing also. As opposed to responding to work in the way that we know it, restrain yourself from doing what you would always do. Take a moment. Think of another approach. So this is what fascinated me about Butoh, is because it puts the body in research.
Wow. You know, the depth in dance, I think that usually you just think somebody has choreography and then automatically what they've done is they've just gone into the stage. But there's a depth to it. There's a thought process, and that's simplicity. I know that also with regard to your dance and the performance, it's inspired by the life cycle of a praying mantis.
Yes.
And I think I'm sure, Raul, we've seen a praying mantis. They just do this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, they just have that movement. And I'm really, really intrigued about why a praying mantis. And I do believe also it kind of lends itself to your training in dance too. So why did you choose something as curious as the life cycle of an insect like this?
I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you. So it's not exactly looking at the life cycle of the praying mantis, but it's more like inspired by the movement language of the praying mantis. So I think much like scientists, like engineers look at the animal kingdom to find innovation, in what I've done over the years, and this is already prior to going to Japan, was looking at what would happen, what could we learn from something other than another human? So as a dancer, as opposed to wanting to replicate what someone else is doing in the studio, what someone else is doing on stage to show that I can also, what about taking that risk and looking at an animal body? Because then you're forced to use your head differently, your eyes differently, your feet differently. And the praying mantis is quite interesting. I was speaking earlier, and we were saying once you've lived in Japan, or even if you've just been there briefly, you're really impacted at a state of calm that seems to exist amongst all the craziness. I mean, it's full of ambiguities and contradictions. But then coming to South Africa, I think that shake that you were referring to, inside, we are shaking all the time in South Africa. You come, you're in the shopping center and your trolley knocks somebody and they react. There's like immediately we on alert all the time. And this sense of shaking inside, I thought was an interesting way to think, what can we learn about the praying mantis that shakes all the time, but it waits. It doesn't react. It takes a long time before it actually does something. And then in terms of dance, what would it mean for a dancer to not show off and not show how well they can be balanced? But of course, you need to be able to be balanced to be imbalanced, right? You need to be able to hold your balance to make it look like you are losing your balance. So that people don't get, when they're watching you, they're not worried about you. They understand that it is, it's a kind of mode of moving. Yeah? That's the way you're telling the story. So that's what's interesting for me about the praying mantis in terms of finding a different movement language, but then also in terms of the concept of just how to think through work, is that the praying mantis, everybody talks about the female bites off the male's head in the act of mating. That's the big thing, right?
I didn't want to ask.
Yes.
I didn't want to, yeah.
But what's interesting is she bites the male's head to provide food for her mantids. It's not about her. It's about the progeny. It's about moving forward. And the same with the male, he sacrifices himself. It's not about just the act of mating, but it's that act of mating that produces something else in the future. And I think this is an interesting way for us to think about moving forward, you know, that it's not about us. It's about, and especially now, we'll say in the time of COVID, and we're having to realize it's always about the other, actually. So this has been a very interesting way of thinking, and that's what I draw into my work and also my studies. Yeah.
Wow. What you're saying is, and I have to make this very personal because it sounds and it seems and feels so pertinent to me. I often see and seek wisdom within nature and the external environment, and often on my experiences in the mountain and in the outdoors, you see so much knowledge that's available to you,
right.
and it's perfect. It's inherent with all the knowledge it needs. So I love what you're saying, and I would love to see this come to fruition in the performance itself. And I believe you actually had a performance this past Sunday, right? And with that, you also had a live Q&A session. So what were some of the popular questions, and what were the concerns, and what came through from that session?
Yeah, so we had so the performance event then is not just me. I work with a pianist, classical pianist, Jose Diaz, and together we conceive this work. And what I think, you know, so we had this discussion with many people set up in different parts of the world afterwards, and the one thing that came up was this sense of synergy, because usually one sees a dancer and a musician, and it's the dancer working with the musician, but this work kind of merges something, and it's as if people were saying things like, we just see breath, there's such an intimacy, there's such a vulnerability, using words like that and saying that the intimacy is created because they couldn't articulate exactly what it was they were feeling, what they were, because it's a performance that breaks all the codes. Yeah. You know, at one moment it feels like the musician, like Jose, is dancing, and it feels like the music is coming through the dance, as opposed to me dancing to the music. But I'm dancing and he's playing the piano, right? But it's the energy that's created through the work, and this synergy was quite an important thing for people, and just feeling like the possibilities, the sense of hope that can be created when we don't fully understand, when we don't work with logic, when we don't think, okay, now I'm going to sit back and be entertained, but when we just allow ourselves to be immersed. So that was the other thing, how people were drawn into this other world, and before they knew it, the 20, 24 minutes of the film was over, and then they were, now, let's talk about it, and but I've got no words, I'm just feeling, I'm just feeling. And that's the idea, that we begin to feel and not necessarily go with the sense of logic, but perhaps an illogic that forces our hearts to open and our skins to tingle, and that's the way we operate. I'm
really excited by this, and I think that Ryle also mentioned earlier that I want to see this.
Yeah, man.
I've done my research, and I've got a snippet, and I think it's important for us to just take a look at Jackie in action. I'm taken aback. I'm impacted on an emotional level. It is really beautiful, and I know that if anybody would like to see this, you are going to be at the Opivatas Festival as well. Is that
yes, that's true. So Jose and I are going to be doing, and then at Opivata, which is that wonderful opportunity to just be sailing on the water and just immersing yourself in theatre. And that's Opivata is happening between the 5th to the 9th of April. So I'll be doing that. I'm also be doing Voete van die Gemsbok again, which a lot of people are familiar with, Randall Wickham's performance in memory of Randall Wickham, and I'm the original buck in that performance.
The original buck.
The original buck of 20 years ago, and 2 years ago we did the Holder Blake on Randall Wickham, and this is happening again on Opivata, and Jose will also be presenting a performance, a concerto as well.
And then, and of course you've got your performance, the final one happening tonight, which you can still get tickets for. That's on quicket.co.za, and there's 75 rand a ticket. So for you guys at home, tonight is that final performance if you want to see this show of And Then, which is an absolutely spectacular performance indeed.
I can just say that the tickets are on sale until 6 p.m. because the last time to watch online is 8 p.m. tonight. So there's still the day to buy the tickets and just to make sure that you log on before 8 p.m.
Yeah, grab your tickets and do support. It's absolutely fantastic. Jackie, thank you for sharing
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
We're really intrigued. So, And Then, make sure you grab your tickets 6 p.m. tonight. That's the cutoff, and then watch it at 8 p.m. a little later. If you're curious about Valentine's Day, let me give you a quick sidebar. There's some gifting ideas that you need to see, and here they are.